I was riding the bus home when it happened, when I blacked out. I'd just come out of a long day at work. I was tired and my eyes were dragging as I got onto the bus. I felt an odd stare come from the bus driver, but I ignored it. I told myself that my mind was tired and making up things. I found a seat near the back and tried to stay awake during the ride. I thought the bumpy roads would keep me conscious, but I was wrong. After 10 minutes on the road, I was leaning my head against the window. I remember checking my phone for the time. It was 11 at night. My phone battery was nearly dead. I don't know when I fell asleep, but it must have been sometime soon after. I awoke to someone shaking my shoulder. It was a bus driver.
"Hey,"
he said.
"it's time to get off. This is the last stop."
Last stop? I asked groggily. I had no idea where the last bus stop was. I always got off on the third stop. I looked out of the window. There were city lights in the dark, unfamiliar place. I don't know where this is.
"Sorry, honey, but I can't take you anywhere else."
I decided not to argue and got off the bus. I shivered in the cold. How long had I been asleep? I wondered. It was still dark outside. There were a few cars on the road. I assumed that it was in the middle of the night. I pulled out my phone, hoping I could use its GPS. My heart sank when I saw that it was dead. Oh, right, I muttered. I'd forgotten that it needed to be charged. Now it was useless, and I had no idea where I was. I raked my mind for any ideas of how to get back home. I fell asleep at 11, and it's still night now. I should be at... I frowned. I was clueless. My phone's GPS had always been the one to tell me where to go. I spotted a map at the bus station that outlined its routes. I ran over to it and tried to piece together where I was. I ran my finger along the route that started at my work. I was 2 hours away. I felt sick to my stomach. I had no phone, no car, and no idea where I was. I looked at the buildings nearby. I saw a gas station and decided to walk over to it. I went inside and asked the cashier for a way to get back home. Are there any buses that go back that way? The cashier laughed.
"Not at this time of night."
Do you know anyone who could give me a ride? I asked desperately. It was a sketchy thing to do, but I had no choice. I was hoping the employee would know someone semi-trustworthy. Instead, a male customer had overheard and offered to give me a ride. He gave me a weird vibe and was looking at me oddly, but I had no choice. I agreed. His car was beaten and dirty inside. I prayed that the next 2 hours would go by fast. We got on the freeway and drove for about an hour. I started to recognize the surroundings, and he took a turnoff and started into town. The scenery quickly changed into shady buildings and graffiti walls. I noticed barbed wire above the fences. Where are we? I asked.
"Just taking a small detour,"
he said calmly. But he locked the doors. He parked into an empty parking lot and leaned over to get something from the glove box. I tensed, looking out of the window. My body was telling me to run. "Don't move," he told me. I noticed he pulled out something shiny. Adrenaline filled my veins. This was life or death. I frantically looked around his car. I noticed a half-empty glass Coca-Cola bottle and grab it. I slam it against his arm. He cries out. Soda sprays in his face and on my jeans. I unlock the car and start running. I head towards the nearby forest, hoping that the trees would hide me. He comes tumbling after me. I notice a river and decide to wade across it. By the time he makes it to the opposite edge, I'm damp and running through the trees. I find a small town and enter the nearest building. It's a hotel. "Can I have a room?" I asked. I ignore the woman staring at my wet clothes. She gives me a key. "Thank you. And please don't tell anyone I'm here if they ask." She only nods. I go into my room and immediately collapse on the bed. Before I know it, it's morning. My clothes are finally dry. I check out and go over to the police station to report what happened. The men look at me, confused.
"Did you recognize the man?"
"No," I start to say, and then I remember the odd look he'd given me. It'd be the same expression I'd seen in the bus. "Wait, I do."
"Can you describe his features to an artist?"
I told them I could try. They sent out a poster, and within a few days the man was caught. He'd done the exact same thing to another woman. She was locked in his car when they found her. They handcuffed him and brought him back to the station. They asked me if this was the same guy. I said yes. It was the bus driver. Apparently he'd done this many times before. He'd pick out a tired woman and drive her out to an unfamiliar town. Then he'd offer her a ride and drive her somewhere that no one could find her.
It's thanks to you that we found him,
the police said.
You were lucky to escape.
I know, I said. I haven't gone inside of a bus since.
I remember the first time I met Richard. We were both taking courses in the same college, and even though we had a different group of friends, we collided with one another while going out to the same bar. I can't say it was love at first sight, but I was definitely smitten by his dark eyes and warm smile. He would always pronounce my name slowly, almost as if he didn't want to let go of my name. Mariana, he would say, spacing out each syllable. It was on that first night, having drinks together, that I realized I wanted to know him more, and I wanted to hear him say my name for years to come. So, when Richard kneeled down, almost falling on the grass, my heart already beating fast, making me doubt everything. But when I heard my name coming from his lips and pronounced on his beautiful voice, I said yes instantly. We were both fresh out of college, juggling different works, but we knew we wanted to get married soon. We set up everything as best as we could. It was an intimate and quiet ceremony, just our families and closest friends. We didn't need much, or so I thought. I mean, sometimes you believe you and your loved ones share the same mindset on some important matters, but turns out life is nothing but a giant maze. It was after our beautiful venue that I went outside to wait for Richard. We had found a small town, really low budget, but nice enough to spend our honeymoon. I was still waiting in my beautiful white gown, the same my mother wore in her wedding. I waited for a bit, worried that Richard had probably parked the car at the wrong place and gotten a ticket. But just as I was about to pull out my phone and call him, I saw a silver-polished car park around the curve, and to my surprise, my husband Richard was peeking from the window while he waved his hands. I got inside the car, still uncertain as to why we were getting in a stranger's car. Did he rent a new car for our honeymoon trip? That was the first I thought, but I knew we were both saving up money. Honey, I said, who's this car? Richard smiled brightly at me, eyes shining as well.
Well, of course it's ours, my love,
he replied. My mouth dropped open at the blunt statement. He got a new car. I was so surprised I couldn't hide the shock from my face. Seeing my reaction, Richard quickly shook his hands, explaining to me how it was a great deal he couldn't miss. After all, he was planning on getting a new car, and he felt this was the best chance to celebrate the beginning of our new life together. I put the new car in the back of my mind. It was his choice, and I trusted him. Besides, there were more pressing matters at the moment. I decided to change the topic and started mentioning all the good things about the small party. How my mother and sister had cried their eyes out, and how even my father, that was mostly reluctant from my decision, was happy enough to even hug Richard after the ceremony. I was so happy, distracted by the events of the day that for most of the trip, I was oblivious to the weird noises coming from the car. I was laughing and smiling, while beside me, Richard's humor seemed to be slightly decreasing. We took a turn, and a loud noise shook the car for an entire minute. That's when I noticed how sweaty and shaky Richard's hands were. I had never owned a car myself, so of course, I wasn't the most adept on the matter. However, I did know that those kinds of noises were not coming from a fully functioning vehicle. Opening my mouth to ask my husband about it, I was cut short by the car. It simply stopped moving in the middle of the road. I saw Richard turning over and over the ignition key, but the car continued making gurgling sounds, no matter how many times he tried. Finally hitting the steering wheel with his hands, Richard turned somberly to me.
I think we need to kickstart the car,
he said. I shook my head. I had only seen people do that in movies, and we were only 2. I love my husband with all my heart, but he's not the fittest man in the world. I doubted he could push the car on his own. Pointing this out, we both decided to walk the rest of the way to the town. We weren't that far off, and we could probably hitch a ride on the way there. We pulled out of the car and started walking. The town was near a mountain, so there weren't many cars heading our way. At that moment, I had been so mad and frustrated that I didn't even consider changing my dress. It was my wedding day, and I didn't want to change. Richard had wanted to carry me bridal style once we reached the hotel. So now here I was in the middle of the road, my long white dress being slightly pulled from side to side due to the heavy breeze. We were quite the pair walking towards the town. One car slowly pulled beside us, only to speed up before we could catch up. The same happened with several cars. They would only get close to press ahead as fast as they could. When we reached the town, it was already dark. The hem of my dress was practically black, and my hair was a big mess. My husband had even pulled out the tie from his suit. As we started walking around the town, we found that every place looked closed. The lights were out, and no matter how many times we tried knocking on several places, they never opened. The town was dead silent. I started crying from desperation, sobs coming from my mouth at full volume. Richard was trying to calm me, saying soothing words, but I continued crying until we heard the sound of steps coming our way. There was a group of people. They were holding torches and crucifixes, marching our way as they yelled prayers and begged for the ghosts to leave the town. Richard positioned himself in front of me. We were drizzled with holy water, and one of the men even threw a crucifix, hitting Richard's head. The moment I saw the blood trickling from his forehead, I started crying as hard as I could. The people around us went quiet, and they started whispering around them. One of the women that was standing at the front reached for Richard's arm. She looked pale and scared, and even yelled when she touched him. "They are not ghosts!" the woman shouted back. Everyone let out a collective sigh of relief. Me and my husband were still huddled together, too confused from their reactions. They proceeded to apologize. They looked deeply sorry and went so far as to let us stay in their best hotel for free, letting us order anything we wanted. We spent the best honeymoon. The people from the town treated us with so much kindness after the incident, making sure we were having a good time. After the weekend was over and we were about to leave, the townspeople came to us. They told us how we would always be remembered as the ghost couple.